Hey, everybody. Mark and I have over 20 years of experience as therapists and as addicts in long term successful recovery. We know better than anyone what works and what doesn't to break out of porn and sex addiction, heal betrayal trauma, and reclaim your relationship.
And we've poured all of our personal and professional recovery and healing experience into a first of its kind program for addicts, spouses, and couples. We call it Dare to Connect.
At least 4 times every week, we engage with you in real time, in the trenches, giving you the knowledge and the tools to take back your life and relationship.
Whatever else you've done on your journey for healing and recovery, you've never done anything like this.
Mark and I, we've made all the mistakes, so you don't have to. Don't reinvent the wheel.
We all know tomorrow never comes. Look, don't wait one more day to change. Claim your free 2-week trial today at daretoconnectnow.com.
Hey, everybody. I'm Steve Moore.
And I'm Mark Castleman.
We know the pain and heartbreak of porn and sex addiction.
And we know the triumph of breaking completely free.
Every day, we help our clients find hope and healing.
Join us in the fight to take back your life, your marriage, and be stronger than ever.
This is the PBSC Squared podcast. So, Mark, oh gosh, this is just embarrassing to talk about.
No, you've never done anything embarrassing in your life.
No, not at all. Confessions of Steve hour. That's what we're doing here. Back in my addiction days, in my really deep addiction days, I remember one distinct event that kind of sticks out, extra special on the shame scale, right, or the regret scale. I don't really have shame about it anymore. I definitely have regret about it. I was in our old condo, like I was on too many nights, and it was way late. I was breaking all the boundaries that we tell clients not to break. It's like 2 or 3 in the morning, and I was on the computer initially to do something innocuous, but for all of the addicts out there listening, that's really just the pretext to eventually acting out.
You were just innocently on your computer at 2 in the morning.
That's right. I mean, I'm just looking up. I was sure I was looking up like educational articles, and then somehow it devolved.
Yes.
I was straight up looking up and looking at pornographic content, and that progressed like it usually does until the point of, it was kind of this worst case scenario. I was kind of following through on everything that comes with a pornography binge and everything that's implied with that. And as that was happening, I hear the bedroom door open. My wife has been asleep for hours now. And the way that our place was structured there, the bedroom literally leads out into a main hallway that leads into the living room. It wasn't a big place. She leans her head out the door, or comes right out and is standing in the hallway. And I've just somehow managed to kind of somewhat make it look like I'm not doing what I'm doing. And she looks at me exhausted with it, point blank, and just says, "Are you looking at pornography?" And I looked at her and I said, "Oh, no, I'm working on," I don't know what I told her I was doing, working on a school assignment or whatever. She looked at me, and even though she was exhausted and tired, kind of half rolled her eyes, let out really just not a dramatic, but just a really dejected sigh, turned around and just went back to bed. Now, there's all sorts of reasons why that story sticks out in my mind, but it's a good segue, I think, into leading into today's topic as we talk about both honesty and the positives of that in a relationship, but also the absolute devastating effect that the lack thereof has as well.
Yeah, that is we might chuckle a little bit about that experience that you just shared, but it's really not funny.
No.
And you and I's, as I look back on similar situations, like you said, I don't have a lot of shame about that. We're just, shame being I'm a rotten loser, terrible person, and I'll never be
Yeah.
worth anything, ever, ever, ever. But I
Mm-hmm.
do still have really deep, deep feelings of sadness.
Yeah.
I just feel sad in my heart
Mm-hmm.
as you think back on those things. And so, yeah, it's those are really painful experiences, both for our spouses and for us.
Well, and I think that the hardest part about that, and a lot of listeners can probably, both addicts and spouses can probably relate to, and the thing that sticks out of my mind is just that look of defeat on my wife's face, right? Of just seeing, just she's caught me literally dead to rights in the middle of acting out,
Yep.
and here I am just blatantly lying to her face about it. It was just that look of the hurt about the lie, I could tell, which is part of what we're going to talk about today. I think was almost more hurtful than the acting out itself.
Yes. Yep. How many times do we hear that in all the work that we do with couples,
Yes.
right? The acting out, the addiction, the betrayal is very, very painful and hurtful, wounding. And yet it's the fact that you lied about it that is the most devastating of all.
Yeah,
And yeah.
absolutely.
And we'll talk more about how that is. So it's funny you tell that story, and I have plenty of dead to rights stories like that. But I would say, in my really deep addiction years, and this started from when I was a kid. When I grew up in LA, in the pornography production capital of the world, San Fernando Valley. And so I was exposed to, really bad stuff at a very young age. It was all around us where I lived. And I learned very early that the quote safe thing to do was to lie, to hide,
Mhm.
to keep everything secret, because if it ever got out, if anyone ever found out what I was involved with, of course, my life was over. My reputation was
Yeah.
shot. No one would ever see me the same again. No one could ever, of course, never love me,
Yep.
knowing that about me. And so I went to great lengths to hide it. And I was like the cover your tracks expert, right? Like the James Bond of covering your addiction, acting out. I went to lengths you can't begin to imagine to make sure that it was never discovered. And but then eventually, when I finally got into a little bit of recovery and started to get some honesty, what I began to practice was selective disclosure,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Checking the honesty box so that I could say to myself, I did it,
Mhm.
but really withholding a fair amount of information. The really juicy, incriminating, embarrassing, shameful stuff, right? I'll share this, but I can't share that.
Yes. Yes.
And I remember I did that with religious leaders, right? I would sit in front of them and they'd,
Oh,
so
man.
yeah, I do have from time to time a struggle with pornography. And I'm thinking in my mind, yeah, from time to time, you mean from minute to minute?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know the religious leader, for example, is going to assume in his mind, okay, this guy, he struggles occasionally, like every few months or something. And often they wouldn't ask any deeper questions.
Sure.
And I'd walk up
Absolutely.
going, yep, I was honest. Check the
Yeah.
box. See, I
Uh,
told him that I struggle with pornography from time to time. That was technically true,
yeah.
but
Absolutely.
never getting never getting transparent and authentic, because it terrified me. And I did the same thing with my wife. I finally
Yeah.
did, after hiding it from her for 15 or more years of our marriage. When I finally did start to get a little bit honest, it was the same thing. Hey, sweetheart, I've been struggling a little bit lately. That was kind of our code word, with Mark's having some pornography struggles, but I
Yeah.
wouldn't go any deeper than that. And
Yeah.
of course, for a wife, it's not comfortable or enjoyable to start prying.
Yeah.
You're going to start asking me details so that I can traumatize you further.
Well, and it's uncomfortable for multiple reasons, right? I think it's not even just that. It's also if I ask him about this, right? Or if I ask details about it, because my story was very much similar to yours, as is I'm sure a lot of our listeners. It was my wife would tell you that every time she wanted to ask more questions like that, she was always weighing out, okay, am I going to, I'll probably get the truth, or I might be able to get the truth, but what cost is it going to come at?
Yes.
What's his emotional response going to
Oh
be?
my gosh, isn't that true?
Is
It's
it worth
like,
3 days of shame, or him just
mm,
flying off the handle and losing it with me and getting super angry and defensive? Like, I don't even want to go through that. It's not
yeah,
even worth it.
and our wife, my wife talks about that today. She's like, I didn't know who was going to show up. Was it going to be Jekyll or Hyde?
Yep.
Was it going to be Mark up or Mark down? Right?
Yeah.
I didn't know who you were going to be in any moment. And so that was going on as part of our addiction cycle anyway.
Yes.
Now your wife's going to ask, prying deep questions and trigger that,
Yes.
which is it's already going on. Oh, okay, great. Let's just magnify it, and let's just plunge him into that right now.
Sure.
So yeah, our wives get into survival. It's like, I got to
Yeah.
survive here.
So true. So
Yeah.
true. Yeah. There's a lot. I mean, it's all out of all those dysfunctional ways in which we respond to questions like that, when we're being honest, right? And we talked about those at length. They are, or if we're not being honest, right? We're talking about honesty today, but those dysfunctional responses, getting aggressive, right? And trying to shut our spouses down, or blame in some way, or gaslight in some way, or going to shame, right? The other end. Either way, a wife loses.
Yes.
Marriage loses.
Yep.
I mean, that was definitely where I would always oscillate to anger first, followed by extreme shame. And
Yep.
so my wife got to put up with the temper tantrum, and then she got to be married to a slug for the next
Yep.
3 days, who was like in
Silence,
Eeyore mode.
right?
Right?
Silence, shut down, isolated.
I'm not worthy. I'm not worth anything. Yeah.
Yeah, my wife called that my little boy mode.
Yes.
Oh, I now
Pretty
am
apt
raising
description.
another boy. Great.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. It's true. And again, we chuckle about it now, right? But I mean, that was so hard. That dynamic, I think, in many respects, and you and I talked about this before the podcast, I think it might have been the hardest part of the whole thing, right? Was the constant fallout that would come from the deception.
Yes.
And the things that would happen, the collateral damage that would come along with it. I don't remember exactly what happened the next day after my story. I can tell you it probably wouldn't go down in the annals of history as a highlight of connection in our relationship.
Yeah. Well, and you and I have a better perspective on that now. We can look back at those days of lying and half truths, and hiding, and all the things that we did.
Yeah.
We can see the results of that now. One of the great challenges is that when you're in it, it's very difficult to see what it's doing.
Yes, it is.
Now for us, hindsight's 2020, of course. But as you and I could do an entire podcast about all the different forms of lies that we engage in as addicts, from the blatant to the very, very, very subtle.
Yes.
But one of the things I wanted to really bring on this podcast is why. Why do we lie? Because it's important to understand why that happens. It isn't just that I wouldn't have considered myself back then, and nearly all the men I work with, they're not just completely and utterly dishonest at their core, right? There's a reason why they're engaging in this practice of not being truthful.
Yeah.
And it virtually always stems back to models and patterns and things they learned as kids right from the beginning.
Sure.
And we carry that with us. And so for me, lying is kind of a twisted, distorted protection strategy. I perceive it as a way to quote, stay safe.
Yeah.
Because if I get really raw and real and I show you the whole me, and I take off the masks and the pretenses and the walls, and I just say, here, what you see is what you get, that is frightening.
Yeah.
And so I tried to protect myself from that scenario at all costs. And I mean at all costs. The costs of my marriage, the costs of my self-worth, the cost of everything.
Yeah.
I just can't go there.
Yeah.
And this is why we engage in this. It's an ego survival brain strategy.
Absolutely. Well, and sometimes we even mix in some good intentions in there, right? I don't want to hurt my spouse. I don't want to cause more pain. I don't want to do that. But yeah, I think it time and again, it's, however, I would say this, in my experience, I have heard many noble excuses over the years, and I have given many noble excuses over the years for acting out, and not talking about it or not sharing. I have yet to see an example of where holding that information back, no matter how well intentioned, has ever benefited the relationship in the long run.
Yeah, I would
Ever.
agree. I would agree. Because I mean, let's be honest, since we're talking about honesty, what you're just, when you say there's a very legitimate side of us that thinks if I share this is going to do great harm and pain and to the person I love.
Yeah.
And so there is a legitimate side to that. I remember that. I didn't want to hurt my wife more and
Hmm.
more and more. It's like, man, I've hurt her enough.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to divulge this and pile on.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is also a reason why we don't go there. Why we shut down. So tough stuff, man. A lot of barriers and a lot of reasons why you shouldn't, tell the whole, wide open, pure truth. I can tell you 100 reasons why you shouldn't do that.
Hmm.
But like you said, how many times have we seen where that works out for the best?
Oh,
You
geez.
know,
Yeah. Very,
no,
very little for
yeah, very,
sure.
very, very little. Hey, everybody, Mark and Steve here. Are you looking to take your recovery and your marriage to the next level?
We work with individuals and couples one-on-one.
With both in-person and online therapy options, you have access to the experts anytime, anywhere.
To learn more, visit us at pbscpodcast.com.
Why is this so devastating to relationships? Because I've had clients say to me, well, Mark, I'm really having a tough time believing you when you tell me that if I divulge all this stuff, it's really going to be in the best interest of the relationship. I only see that it has the potential to do just the opposite. How can you
Yeah.
possibly justify to me that how this is going to be helpful?
Oh gosh, I could do 5 podcasts on this. We're hitting on it's a Steve soapbox alert, everybody. Here it goes. I'm going to keep it down to earth though, because we are sticking to our time boundary today. But I mean, I think it's devastating in the long run on a couple levels. The first thing that I would say to that, if I was working with a client who said that to me, which happens a lot, is I'll validate that position. Yeah, it is going to be hurtful. It absolutely is. You're absolutely right. But it's not going to be as hurtful in the long run as deception. And the reason why I say that is I've heard this from, I mean, it hits on a truth that I'm going to share in a second, but wife after wife over the years has told me the same thing, more or less. I've shared it on here before. The acting out, Steve, the sexual addiction component, the acting out, the betrayal, the infidelity, those are all hurtful, right? They betray loyalty, they betray trust, they undermine my self-confidence, they do all sorts of things to me. But what I hear from, again, 95% of those same women as they go through the process and as they look back is they will identify the deception component as being the most devastating piece of the entire story. It's this idea of not knowing who I am married to. It's this feeling of being with someone who's a stranger. It's this feeling of being denied the opportunity to do what I promised to do with my partner and they promised to do with me, which was to face life challenges together, to walk through this life and to have each other's back. And when we throw deception into the mix, however well intended, you instantly have just thrown up a wall between the two partners. Now, instead of us being back to back against the world, it's now we're fighting our own battles individually, and inevitably we end up fighting ourselves even more. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a quick overview of my inner soapbox with that. But I think that I mean, that is why I see it so devastating. No, and this is applicable, guys, not just to marriages. We're talking just relationships now. A relationship, as we've talked about many times, the intimacy of it is directly correlated with the level of transparency and vulnerability. As that is part of that. The degree to which I can be intimate emotionally with another person is the degree to which I can emotionally undress with that person and be real. And if I'm holding back important information like that, if I'm trying to, from whatever standpoint or intention, trying to keep things from anyone, including anyone that I'm wanting an intimate relationship, including a partner, to some degree, be it lesser or more so, it will impact and limit that relationship. It just will. I can't, if I'm 70% honest with people, I can best case be 70% connected with them. I can't connect more than I share, more than I show, because I'm not giving the other person the real me. I'm cheating them out of knowing the real me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I hear that. It's you're really robbing yourself of having a closeness that you could have.
Yes.
But I hear a lot women say, he didn't even give me the opportunity to really choose because I
Mm,
didn't have all the information when I
absolutely.
was choosing him. And so
Yes.
now I've had women say, I feel like the dumbest person on the earth. How
Yes.
could I have been fooled like that?
Yes.
How could I have allowed myself to be sucked in like that?
Well, that probably brings up the last part of that answer. Why is this so devastating? Gentlemen, for all you listening out there, all the addicts that are listening out there, what you're doing when you bring the deception component in, or the more you add the deceptive component into your acting out or your addiction or whatever else may be going on, you're actually just heaping on more trauma, because what you're setting your partner up for is that insanity, that crazy making we talk about all the time in recovery. It's a wife isn't just the person she's supposed to trust the most. She isn't able to trust. And when you start losing the ability to trust the person that you're supposed to be able to trust the most, you start to question everything. Most wives have described that as feeling literally insane. I am losing my mind. I don't know what is right or wrong, because if this guy who I'm married to, who I sleep with, who's in this relationship with me, who I've built a life with, who I've had kids with, if he can keep this stuff from me, well, then who the hell else is lying to me? Is anything
Yes.
even true?
Yep.
Is this all just a sham? Am I just living the Truman Show? Like what is true, what is not? And so it destabilizes. You're not just destabilizing the fabric of your relationship, you're destabilizing the reality of your partner.
Yep, their reality is
Yeah,
being, distorted and broken. And
absolutely.
the other thing that comes to my mind, as I look back on all the times that I did not include my wife
Hmm.
in the deep down dark things that were going on in my soul, I robbed myself of her companionship, her
Yes.
partnership, her help. She's a very bright, capable, intuitive, amazing person. And all those decades that I went it alone,
Yeah.
she didn't have the chance to step in and have my back and help me because I denied her that opportunity.
Yes.
And so that's another thing that happens is we deny our spouse the opportunity to do that, which they want to do desperately. And we also deny the growth of the relationship.
So
If I'm
true.
scared that if I show this particular part of myself, it's going to destroy the relationship, I have to really question the relationship itself. If that's
Yes.
all the confidence I have, right? If it gets hard and I divulge this thing, we're done.
Yes.
Really? Really? That's all you've got in the relationship? Great relationships come through the fire. They come through
Yes.
trial. And my wife and I like to say, we've been through hell
Hmm.
and you can't break us apart today.
Yep.
But not because I kept taking the easy route, but because I was willing to now take the hard path.
Yes. You're absolutely right. And so, yeah, they're inevitably, I think the consequences, I think in again, my experience in every circumstance of deception are always more so devastating than the information itself in the long run,
Yeah.
to the relationship and to the other person. So for all of those out there who are thinking about holding back more lies from their wife, however well intended it is, take it from two guys who spent a lifetime trying to figure out a way in which that was actually true, and it's crap. There's just not a way to do it.
Yeah,
It doesn't exist.
there just isn't. We talk about, in our addictions having all kinds of situations where we weren't honest. Another part of this that we often overlook is that when we put our wives into the position of this whole addiction issue, they also have situations where they're not able to be honest
Yes.
or choose not to be honest for a number of reasons.
Yes.
And we probably ought to touch on that real quick.
Yeah, when we did a little bit, right? There are a lot of my wife, and actually, I talked to her this morning about the subjects that were going to come up today, and she actually, I'm glad you said that, because she asked me to actually mention that and talk about it. My wife, for years, held back feelings about how my level of acting out hit her, and this part of the story is probably important for those whose story maybe is like mine. I have definitely examples where I actively lied to my wife in this process, but I think I was much more guilty and on almost a daily basis about that passive lying. It was rare when I would blatantly just get called on the carpet and say, no, that's not what happened. I don't know what you're talking about. It was much more along the lines of, okay, I'll be honest, but if you can nail me on the day, the time, and how many times I looked at pornography and masturbated, if you can, it was the 25th on this date, and for these 3 hours, you were doing that in the afternoon, right? Yes, I was. Right. That was kind of that level of honesty. And, and, and so for years, she was living a lie now from a survival place, but because she didn't know how else to do it, because every time she would bring up my issue or these issues, she would get what we just talked about a few minutes ago. She'd get a mixture, and it would be all over the board. Any random combination of these, this completely shame-based individual, this, like you said, this child that she's now, this pouty, whiny child that she's now going to be married to for the next week. She'd get a mix of that with like the teenager response of, I can't believe you'd ask me that. Why would you ever think I would? And I would call her into question to the point where the emotional cost on her was so great that she was avoiding asking questions like that and holding back how much this thing was hurting her from that place of love, and trying to preserve what little was going on in the relationship. She was trying to patch up a sinking ship. So you're absolutely right. I think spouses do this a lot.
Yep, and the other thing that happens because of that, just trying to survive and hold together what little you've got, a lot of women have expressed to me that they had intuitions, they had little impressions that something wasn't right. They had some would call it, spiritual insights or whatever it was. They just had a feeling, and
Yes.
yet they couldn't express it. It
Mm-hmm.
was just too risky. They just knew that if they dared to express what they were feeling, he's going to fall apart even more. Or what if I'm wrong? What if this
Yeah.
impression isn't correct? What if
Mm-hmm.
what if I've misjudged him, or I'm missing the mark? And
Yeah.
boy, if a woman gives an addict one little crack of that opportunity, we'll jump on it and make sure she realizes that she could be wrong. Right?
Sure.
Here comes the gaslighting techniques and
Yes.
tactics. So
Absolutely.
there's a lot of reasons why we both can get in a position of withholding, the whole truth. So if we get to what to do about this,
Yep.
okay, that's great, Mark and Steve. We know all that stuff is going on, but what do we do about it?
This is a sensitive one, because in my line of work, so I'm a certified sex addiction therapist, and I walk clients through what's called the disclosure process, a formal disclosure process. And there's no time to talk about that today, but it's a process that we take clients through where we actually walk them through this place of dishonesty and helping them to get to that place of honesty so that they can move forward. It doesn't happen with every client, but it is with probably the majority. And the training I got on how to do that was like 4 days long. Like it was like 40 hours.
Yeah.
And rightfully so, because what you do with disclosure and how it's done can potentially be an unnecessary deal breaker in a relationship. Now, I say unnecessary because sometimes it might be the deal breaker regardless, right? And that happens, and that is, and when that happens, it's unfortunate, but that may have been what was going to play out all along. However, when disclosures are mishandled, and there's a variety of ways in which that happens, you can either, the way that is done can either really build up and form a foundational kind of bedrock from where to continue on in recovery, or it can be the absolutely most devastating thing and be a nuclear bomb on the relationship.
Yes.
And so we're going to we are heavily recommending to you that this disclosure process, what we're going to say next, it really should be done under the guise of working with a qualified professional of some sort. At a very baseline, okay, an absolute baseline, I don't care what the situation is, you and your spouse better have some sort of a support system in place. People that they can go to, be it religious leaders, be it 12-step group members, be it other forms of support on board. But again, we would recommend that it be done with a therapist. However, the beginnings of this can be done prior to accessing a therapist, and that's the part that we'll give you guys today. In addition to that, before you go and try to fix these things, and to kind of unburden stuff if there's stuff out there, is we're going to have each of you, both you addicts and you spouses, start writing out an honesty inventory, for lack of a better term. What are the things that I have been honest and forthright with in this relationship? And what are the things that I hold back for whatever reason, right? What pieces of me am I keeping from the one person on this planet who I am supposed to be able to not have to, I'm supposed to not keep anything from.
Yeah.
And so to kind of start cataloging and getting that down on paper. And we recommend working on that in a fashion of getting ready to share those things with your partner. And then, like I said, that's where you're going to want to involve a qualified professional, and at least at a baseline, be bouncing that off of some trusted people in your life about how to do that, while ensuring that your partner's got people to turn to, so that when things become, because there is a difficulty that comes with that disclosure initially. It gives the relationship the very best chance to work, but it again, it can be very hurtful and painful, and the way that it's done could be the determining factor in a relationship ending that might not otherwise need to.
Yeah,
So,
I agree. And a caution I have for everyone is, if you do start to do this honesty inventory and you start to write it down yourself, make sure you keep it private.
yes,
In some households, that might be you need it in password protected, because people can't resist trying to go sneak and see if they can see what you're writing.
yes,
So keep it locked down, keep it private, and please don't jump the gun.
yes,
Please, you spouses, don't start to apply pressure. What are you writing? Let's talk about it.
yeah,
It'd be very easy to give in to that temptation, but just
yes,
write it out, keep it private, and just have it ready for when you do seek professional help. The other thing you and I talked about, Steve, is what in addition to that, because that's a big major project for sure.
yeah,
What are some little things we can do each day to help to make these little deposits to the relationship trust account? And as I look at that, for me, all of us have little opportunities on a daily basis to be honest in, quote, small ways. Little things that I could express and tell that I hold back.
yeah,
Little details that I don't share because I don't know if they'll be received well. Little white lies that I might engage in when I should have just come clean and told the whole truth about whatever it was. There's little
yes,
things like that that go on all the time. And can
yes,
you start to become aware of those, and then dare, when the little voice inside of you saying, nope, nope, don't bother, don't tell, don't give the details, do just the opposite. You know what? I'm
yes.
just going to be fully open right now in this moment.
Well, you bring up a great point that wherever things are at going forward, we're going to recommend, again, consulting a professional. That's our disclaimer. Every situation is so unique; it's impossible to kind of give a blanket advice with this. But
I know.
as much as is possible and feasible and reasonable, start the pattern of honesty today. While you're working on disclosure of stuff about the past feelings, past indiscretions, past whatever. Commit to your partner as you guys listen to this podcast, ideally together, that while we're working on this stuff individually and figuring out how best to handle the past, we are going to be honest with each other with issues and things that come up today going forward.
Yep.
Um,
Honesty right now and moving ahead from now on.
yes,
Love it.
absolutely.
All right. So there you go.
Yep, that's about all we've got for today. We've put everyone through enough, I'm sure. So, congratulations, all you listeners! We're throwing you those virtual versions of T-shirts of "I survived another podcast with Mark and Steve." So,
Exactly.
badge of honor.
Well, thanks everybody, and we'll be with you again next week.
Yep, have a great week, everybody.
That's all for today. Thanks for joining us. And remember, the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection. Together, we can do the impossible.
To learn more about Mark and Steve and to listen to more podcast episodes, visit us at pbscpodcast.com. Everything expressed on the PBSC podcast are the opinions of the hosts and the participants and is for informational and educational purposes only. This podcast should not be considered mental health therapy or as a substitute thereof. It is strongly recommended that you seek out the clinical guidance of an individual qualified mental health professional. If you're experiencing thoughts of suicide, self-harm, or a desire to harm others, please dial 911 or go to your nearest emergency room.